In the murky swamps of Black Marsh, a young Argonian named Xhuth placed his hand upon the ancient bark of a Hist tree. A flood of forgotten memories surged into his mind, guided by ancestral whispers he could not ignore. This single act of communion shattered his quiet life, launching him on a perilous quest. He must discover why the Hist trees are suddenly awakening their ancient knowledge now. The stability of his tribe and the delicate balance of the entire marsh hangs in the balance as Xhuth becomes a living vessel for the tree's long dormant stories. By the end of this tale, you will understand the profound connection between memory and destiny, and how one person's courage can heal an entire world. Where are you listening from right now, and what is the local time where you are? I always find it wonderful to hear how stories travel. What secrets would a forest share if the trees could truly remember? Xhuth found Elder Sithizid at the moss-covered roots of the village central Hist. As he poured out the torrent of ancestral visions, the old Argonian's eyes widened with a recognition that chilled the humid air. This is not a normal passing of stories, Xhuth. The Hist sleeps for generations, its memories a slow, deep river. What you describe is a flash flood. This awakening has not occurred since my own grandfather's time. Sithizid explained that only at the Heartwood Glade, the nexus of the entire Hist network, could the source of this disturbance be found. The moment Xhuth volunteered to make the journey, the unity of the tribe shattered. Some saw the young Argonian as Saxhiel, the chosen one foretold in whispers, destined to mend the broken song of the marsh. Others, especially the seasoned hunters, viewed him with open suspicion. They argued the swamps were more treacherous than ever, and that sending their strongest to guard a fool's quest would leave the village vulnerable. Our way of life is balance, not reckless pursuit of phantom whispers, one hunter growled, his tail lashing the muddy ground. You would have us risk everything for a feeling. Yet Xhuth's resolve was forged in the fire of the memories he now carried. He would not let their fear chain him. He spent the evening gathering what few supplies he could secure, a simple pack of dried fish and a water skin, his decision firm. He would depart at dawn, guided by the Hist's pull in his blood rather than the doubts echoing around him. The stakes were terrifyingly clear. If he failed, the tribe's sacred connection to the Hist could fade into silence, their history and identity lost. But if he succeeded, the truths he might unearth could rewrite everything they knew about their past and their purpose. As he secured the final strap on his pack, a low, deep tremor rumbled through the marsh. The very ground shuddered, causing huts to sway and water to slosh over the banks of the village ponds. The Hist's distress was no longer just a voice in his mind. It was now a physical quake, shaking the world beneath their feet. The quaking ground had stilled, but a new unease settled over the marsh as Xhuth took his first steps beyond the village. The familiar paths he had known since childhood were gone, swallowed by a sudden surge of thorny vines and murky water. He closed his eyes, trusting the pull in his blood, the subtle guidance of the Hist that flowed through him like a second heartbeat. It guided his feet to solid ground, hidden beneath deceptive pools, and warned him of a strangleroot's tightening coil just before it snapped shut. This was no longer the swamp of his youth. It was a living, breathing maze reacting to the Hist's turmoil. Landmarks he had used for navigation since he was a hatchling had simply vanished, replaced by unfamiliar groves of twisted trees. The very geography was rewriting itself, a direct consequence of the chaotic memories flooding the network. He fought against a rising tide of panic, the terrifying thought that he could be lost forever just a stone's throw from home. To anchor himself, he scraped patches of glowing blue fungi from the bark of a drowned tree, pressing them onto passing trunks to leave a faint, pulsing trail behind him. It was an old method, one his ancestors used, a small act of defiance against the marsh's new, volatile nature. Each step was a gamble, potentially leading him deeper into the territory of a territorial slaughterfish, or the nesting ground of an agitated Nyx hound. The familiar calls of the swamp now sounded like warnings. Then, cutting through the oppressive silence, a low, melodic hum began to vibrate through the soles of his feet. It was a sound that seemed to bypass his ears and speak directly to his soul, a resonant call emanating from the deepest, darkest part of the wetlands. The Hist's distress was no longer a feeling or a tremor. It had a voice, and it was pulling him forward. The resonant call led him to a structure so old it seemed to have grown from the swamp itself. A crumbling stone archway, its surface weeping glistening Hist sap, stood half swallowed by thorny vines. Driven by the same instinct that had guided him this far, Xhuth reached out and pressed his palm against the sticky, living resin. The world dissolved. He was no longer a solitary traveler in a troubled marsh. He stood amidst a vast gathering of Argonians from tribes he did not recognize, their scales gleaming under a brilliant sun. They were not merely standing near the great trees. They were moving in a slow, deliberate dance with them, their chants harmonizing with the rustle of leaves in a single, unified song. This was a ceremony of binding, a sacred pact where tribe and tree became one. The memory was not just an image, it was a physical sensation of profound connection, a time when the word tribe meant all of Black Marsh, not just a single village. The vision faded, leaving him breathless and leaning against the cold stone. The clarity of that ancient unity made the squabbling and suspicion of his own village feel like a sickness. Could his people ever regain that lost harmony, or were they forever fractured, their great song reduced to fearful whispers? He would not let this memory fade. Using a sharp stone, he began to carefully carve the symbols he had seen, the swirling patterns of the dance, and the interlocking roots of the pact, into the wood of his travel staff. Each mark was a promise, a physical anchor for a truth that felt more real than the mud beneath his feet. The weight of his task grew heavier. The Hist was not just waking up, it was remembering a time of wholeness, and its reawakening was a test. If his people could understand this call, they could heal. If they rejected it, these returning memories would only highlight their divisions, deepening the rifts into uncrossable chasms. As he stepped away from the archway, his newly carved staff in hand, he noticed the forest around him had fallen into an unnerving silence. The constant drone of insects and the distant calls of wildlife had ceased completely. The swamp was holding its breath, waiting to see what he would do with the ancient hope he now carried. The unnerving silence broke as Xhuth pushed through a final curtain of weeping moss and found himself at the edge of a vast, open clearing. This was the Heartwood Glade, but his path was barred by a sight that rooted him to the spot. A warden tree, colossal and ancient, stood sentinel at the Glade's entrance. Its bark was slick with glistening sap that dripped like tears, and a visible shimmer of psychic energy pulsed from its trunk, forming a humming barrier that warped the very air. The tree did not speak in words, but a demand echoed directly within Xhuth's mind. It challenged his right to enter, probing his spirit and demanding proof of his worth. To pass, he had to share a memory from the Hist, one that demonstrated a pure understanding of tribal loyalty. A cold dread washed over him. He was no elder, no storied shaman. He was just Xhuth, who until recently had only known the small concerns of his village. What if the memories he carried were not enough? What if his own doubts tainted the recollection and proved him unworthy? The warden tree's presence was an immense weight on his consciousness, and for a terrifying moment, his mind went blank, filled only with the fear of failure. Then his hand tightened around his travel staff, his fingers tracing the symbols he had carved just hours before. The vision from the stone archway flooded back, not as a distant scene, but as a living truth. He remembered the feeling of unity, the song that was not one voice but thousands, all bound together. He did not merely describe the memory, he let it flow through him, and as he opened his mouth, the ancient words of the pact, words he had never learned but somehow knew, fell from his lips. They were a low, resonant chant that harmonized with the hum of the barrier itself. As the final syllable faded, the shimmering wall of energy dissolved. The warden tree's oppressive presence softened into something resembling approval, and the path into the Heartwood glade lay open. This victory, however, came with a new and chilling cost. His successful passage was a beacon. Somewhere in the shifting shadows of the marsh, forces that craved the Hist's power for themselves now felt a ripple in the network. They felt a new vessel step into a place of immense power, and they turned their attention toward him. Stepping past the warden tree, Xhuth was immediately enveloped by the Glade's atmosphere. It was not a single voice that filled him, but a chorus, a torrent of countless memories and sensations from every corner of Black Marsh. The collective consciousness of the Hist washed over him, a river of time and experience so vast it threatened to sweep his own identity away. Yet within that overwhelming flood, a single, urgent thread pulled at his awareness, guiding him toward the very center of the clearing where the oldest of the Hist trees waited, its roots sunk deep into the heart of the world. The air in the Heartwood glade hummed with the weight of ages. Xhuth approached the central Hist, a being so immense its roots seemed to anchor the sky itself. With a final, steadying breath, he placed both hands upon its ancient, weeping bark. The world vanished. He was no longer Xhuth, but 1,000 Xhuths, a million lives unfolding all at once. He felt the first rains on newborn scales, the grief of 1,000 funerals, the triumph of battles fought, and one long before his village was built. It was a beautiful and terrifying symphony of existence, but the music was fraying at the edges. Threads of discord, a sour, metallic note, wove through the chorus. He saw it then, not with his eyes but with his soul. A magical scar, a deep and festering wound from a conflict so old its name was dust, was pulsing with renewed agitation. This forgotten imbalance was poisoning the network, forcing the Hist to convulsively remember everything in a desperate attempt to stabilize itself. The pressure was immense, a tidal wave of foreign lives, threatening to wash his own consciousness away into the endless sea of memory. He was drowning in time. His sense of self, his name, his purpose, began to dissolve like mist in the morning sun. In that moment of utter surrender, a single memory shone with the clarity of a lone star in a stormy sky. It was not a king or a great warrior, but a simple healer who, facing a similar cacophony, had not fought the noise. Instead, she had offered a song of balance, a ritual of quiet acceptance that calmed the raging chorus. Xhuth clung to this single thread of hope. He would not command the Hist. He would listen, and he would answer its pain with an echo of that ancient harmony. The fate of every tribe, every memory, every Argonian yet to be born, now hinged on this one fragile decision. As he wrenched his awareness back into his own body, breaking the connection with a gasp, the ghost of that discordant energy remained. It was a faint, cold vibration on the edge of his senses, a wrongness emanating from the northern marshes, and he knew his journey was far from over. The discordant energy pulled Xhuth north, a cold thread tugging at his soul. It led him to a place where the swamp water turned black, and the air grew thick with the scent of rust and regret. Before him lay the sunken ruins of a temple, its moss-eaten spires breaking the water's surface like the bones of a forgotten leviathan. This was the source of the poison in the Hist, a wound that had never fully healed. The whispers of the trees guided him forward, their voices a mixture of urgency and deep, ancestral pain. He knew he was looking for an object of immense power, an artifact the memories called the Tear of Argonia. It was said to have been forged in a time of great unity, a vessel designed to hold the most precious memories of the Hist, preserving them against any catastrophe. But its purpose had been twisted. A faction of long-dead Argonians, fearing the loss of their own glory, had attempted to use the tear not to preserve, but to edit the Hist's consciousness, to carve their own legacy into the very root of their people's identity. This act of profound arrogance was the original sin, the magical scar that now festered and bled chaos back into the network. The ruins themselves defended this shameful secret. As Xhuth waded through the chest-deep, chilling water, ghostly sentinels materialized from the mist, their forms woven from regret and lingering magic. They were not hostile so much as sorrowfully obstructive, their cold touch threatening to flood his mind with the very memories of failure and ambition he was there to confront. He dodged shimmering fields of energy that crackled between broken pillars, traps set to deter any who would uncover this buried truth. Each step was a battle not just against the ruins' defenses, but against the Hist's own traumatic recall of that ancient betrayal, a psychic scream that echoed through the centuries. He found the tear resting on a silt-covered altar in the deepest chamber. It was not a gem, but a pulsating sphere of solidified sap, dark and cloudy at its core, where the corrupted memories swirled. To touch it was to feel the immense weight of stolen time. The choice was clear. He could leave it here and let the Hist's convulsions continue until they tore the marsh apart. Or he could take it and risk everything. Xhuth made his decision. He would not repeat the mistakes of the past. He would not use the tear's power. He would carry this burden back to the Heartwood Glade and offer it to the Hist itself. Only by willingly embracing this painful memory, by integrating the truth of its own violation, Could the network truly heal? But the moment his fingers closed around the cool, dense surface of the tear, the entire ruin shuddered. A low hum built in the air, and the dark water began to bubble. He had unsealed the wound. The unstable energy contained within the artifact was now awake, and if he did not complete his ritual soon, this stored power would not simply fade. It would explode outwards, erasing every new memory formed in Black Marsh for a generation. Cradling the tear against his chest, Xhuth fled the sinking temple. As he broke back out into the fading light of the swamp, he felt the Hist's anxiety sharpen into a piercing note of alarm. The network was holding its breath, waiting for his next move. The time for contemplation was over. The moment for the ritual of balance had arrived. The village he had left only days before was now a camp of fear and suspicion. Xhuth returned not as a hopeful traveler, but as a bearer of a dangerous artifact, and he found the community fractured. A faction led by Visks, a hunter whose own mate had been lost to a sudden marsh quake, had turned against the very trees that had always guided them. We cannot live with a mind that changes the ground beneath our feet, Visks argued, his voice cutting through the evening air as he stood before a crowd of nodding tribesmen. The Hist brings chaos, not wisdom. We must cut our ties to survive. The moment they saw the tear of Argonia in Xhuth's grasp, their suspicion turned to open hostility. They demanded he hand it over, to be buried or destroyed, seeing it not as a cure, but as the source of the sickness. Xhuth stood alone before them, the pulsating sphere feeling heavier than stone. He knew he could not force them. The ritual of balance required a unified will, a chorus of trust to help the Hist heal. If he performed it with only a handful of believers, their collective strength would be too weak, and the network's collapse would become an irreversible doom. His own survival was a secondary concern, so he made the most dangerous offer of his life. He would not hide the tear's power. He would use it, right there before them, in a small ceremony to show the Hist's true intent. He would open himself to the corrupted memories within the artifact, not to command them, but to let the village witness the pain and the hope the trees were trying to share. It was a gamble that could shatter his own mind, but it was the only way to prove that the Hist was not their enemy. It was crying out for their help. The tension was a physical force in the humid air. Just as Visks moved to stop him, Elder Sithizid stepped forward, his aged frame a pillar of resolve amidst the turmoil. He placed a scaled hand on Xhuth's shoulder, a silent declaration of faith. "We will go to the Heartwood Glade," the elder announced, his voice silencing the arguments. "We will face this memory together as a tribe, or we will cease to be one." The decision was made. The path was set for a final gathering where the fate of their connection to the Hist and to each other would be decided not by force, but by a shared act of courage. The Heartwood Glade hummed with a different energy this time, a frantic, discordant pitch that set Xhuth's teeth on edge. He knelt at the base of the central Hist, the tear of Argonia cradled in his palms like a wounded heart. Sithizid and the few who had kept faith formed a tight circle around him, their hands linked, their low chants a fragile raft on a sea of psychic noise. Xhuth closed his eyes and reached for the turbulent current of the Hist's consciousness. He did not push his will upon it. Instead, he offered the tear as a focal point, a vessel for the network's pain. The corrupted memories, the ancient scar of arrogance, began to flow through him and into the artifact. It was agony, a torrent of stolen time and broken promises, but he held fast, channeling it all, while the supportive wills of his small circle acted as a buffer, helping to soothe the raging flow. A visible calm began to emanate from the great tree, the frantic shimmer in the air softening as the Hist, finally given a tool to process its trauma, started to integrate the overwhelming flood. This fragile piece shattered with the crack of a breaking branch. Visks and his hunters burst from the tree line, their faces set in grim determination. They saw not a healing, but a dangerous summoning of the very power they feared. "Stop this madness," Visks roared, his spear held ready. "You drown us in their chaos." The circle around Xhuth tightened. Sithizid and the others stood their ground, a living shield, but they were outnumbered. A physical struggle would break the ritual's concentration and doom them all. Xhuth felt the Hist's newfound stability waver, the chaotic memories threatening to burst their conduit. In that critical moment, he made a choice that defied all instinct. He did not order his followers to fight. Instead, he opened his eyes, his gaze locking with Visks across the glade. His voice, strained with the effort of channeling, cut through the tension. "Your pain is part of this memory, Visks. The Hist feels your fear as its own. To heal, it must remember all of us, even your anger." He then did the unthinkable. He broke the circle with one hand, reaching out toward his greatest opponent, an open invitation into the ritual. The entire glade seemed to hold its breath. Visks stood frozen, the point of his spear dipping toward the mossy ground. He saw not a challenger in Xhuth, but a vessel bearing the collective grief of the marsh, including his own. The memory of his lost mate, a sorrow he had buried under layers of rage, now surfaced with the Hist's gentle pull. It was not an accusation, but an acknowledgement. His hesitation stretched for an eternity, the fate of the tribe balanced on the edge of his decision. Then, with a shuddering breath, he let his spear fall. He took one step, then another, until his rough, scaled hand clasped Xhuth's outstretched one. As their connection solidified, the energy in the glade transformed. The discordant hum resolved into a deep, resonant chord. The Hist's embrace washed over them all, not as a dominating force, but as a grateful, healing presence, weaving their individual wills back into its ancient, mending song. A soft, steady light began to pulse from the bark of the central Hist, washing the glade in a warm, golden radiance. The frantic energy that had gripped the swamp, for so long dissolved, replaced by a deep, resonant hum of peace. The very ground seemed to sigh in relief as the trees absorbed the last of the tears' chaotic memories, weaving them back into the tapestry of their shared consciousness. The tribe's combined will had not just calmed the storm, it had transformed the poison into medicine. The bond between Argonian and Hist, once strained to its breaking point, was now stronger and more intimate than it had been in generations. Any member of the tribe could now approach a tree, place a hand upon its bark, and feel the echo of their shared history, a living library of wisdom accessible to all who approached with a willing heart. As the others broke into relieved celebration, their voices rising in a joyful chorus, Xhuth felt a quiet emptiness open within him. The immense purpose that had driven his every step was gone. The crisis was over. What was he now, without the burden that had defined him? Would he simply return to his old life, forever changed but with no clear role to play? The question lingered, a small, cold stone in the warmth of the healing light. He watched Visks share a quiet moment with Elder Sithizid, their former conflict washed away by the shared ritual. He saw young hatchlings tentatively touching the roots of the glowing trees, their eyes wide with wonder at the gentle whispers now reaching them. In their faces, he saw the answer. The Hist was stable, but its stories were not self-telling. Its wisdom was not self-guiding. The new connection was a gift, but like any powerful gift, it required understanding to be used wisely. Xuth would not be the chosen one anymore. He would become a keeper, a teacher. He would dedicate his life to guiding others, showing them how to listen to the trees without being overwhelmed, how to honor the memories without losing themselves. He would ensure that the tribe's newfound unity was nurtured and protected. This new era of prosperity was a beautiful beginning, but Xuth understood that balance was not a permanent state to be achieved and forgotten. It was a continuous act, a song that required every voice to maintain its harmony. Future challenges, from within and without, would test this fragile peace. Vigilance would be the price of their prosperity. As the celebration continued around him, a gentle, knowing nudge brushed against his mind, a feather-light touch from the vast consciousness of the Hist. It carried no words, only a profound sense of gratitude and a clear, thrilling promise. His journey as a lone seeker was over, but his greater work was just beginning. Xuth raised the tear of Argonia high, its cloudy core beginning to glow with the collective hope of his people. It was not a weapon, but a lens, focusing their unified will into a single, brilliant beacon. The turbulent memories of the Hist, once a chaotic flood, now flowed through him in a guided river, channeled by the supportive circle of his tribe. He felt the immense pressure of centuries of pain and pride, a weight that threatened to crack his very bones, yet he stood firm as a conduit for healing. The air itself began to vibrate, charged with the potential for either catastrophic failure or profound renewal. Then Visks took his final step forward, his spear clattering to the mossy ground forgotten. His eyes, once hard with suspicion, were wide with a dawning, terrifying understanding. Xuth did not flinch, holding the glowing artifact steady. "Join us," he whispered, his voice carrying the weight of the entire marsh. "Feel what the trees have been trying to tell us." Visks' hand, calloused and scaled, reached out and touched the tear. The moment his fingers made contact, his entire body went rigid. He did not see a dominating force or a chaotic mind. He felt a profound, aching sorrow for every life lost to the marsh's recent turmoil, including his own mate. He felt the Hist's desperate, loving attempt to hold every memory, every story, safe from oblivion. It was not an attack, but an embrace of shared grief and shared hope. A choked sob escaped him, not of pain, but of release. As his will joined the circle, the energy in the glade transformed completely. The discordant hum snapped into a single, harmonious chord. A wave of pure, golden light erupted from the central Hist, not as an explosion, but as a gentle, pervasive tide. It washed over the gathered Argonians, over the glade, and radiated outwards across the entire swamp. The very ground seemed to sigh, the water clearing, the twisted vines relaxing their grip. The fractured memories were not erased, but mended, their sharp, painful edges smoothed and integrated back into the vast, beautiful tapestry of the Hist's consciousness. The brilliant surge faded, leaving behind a deep, resonant silence that was full of peace. The tribe's bond with the trees was no longer a fragile thread, but a living root, sunk deep into the heart of the world, stronger than it had been in generations. The golden light of the healed Hist network settled into a gentle, constant hum, a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat that now pulsed through the very soil of Black Marsh. Xuth stood in the quiet of the Heartwood Glade, no longer a vessel for chaotic storms, but a guardian of the new calm. The ancient trees, once frantic with fractured memories, had become serene living libraries. Any Argonian could now approach, press a hand to the bark, and feel the warmth of their heritage, the stories of their ancestors flowing into them not as a flood, but as a gentle, guiding stream. He had evolved from the curious youth who first touched the tree into a storyteller and a mediator, the one who could teach others how to listen to the whispers without being overwhelmed by the song. His days were spent guiding the young, settling disputes with tales of the past, and reminding his people that their strength lay in their connection to each other and the rooted wisdom that surrounded them. The Hist, in turn, remained an ever-watchful presence, its whispers no longer cries of distress, but promises of shared growth and steadfast protection. This new era was not an end to struggle, but a beginning of profound understanding. The marsh and its people were now intertwined in a way unseen for centuries, poised for a future where every challenge would be faced not alone, but with the collective memory of ages at their backs. The path forward was one of harmony, a continuous, conscious choice to grow together.